Jesus appeared in my dream last night. I don't ever recall the Lord Jesus coming to me in person in a dream, but he did. What happened is a couple of us were gathered together like in a living room, and they said that we're going to have an opportunity to meet Jesus personally, and we could ask him questions if we want. So I remember him walking into the living room, and he walks to one person and he gives the hand and he shakes that person's hand, but that person is sitting on a chair and doesn't get up. Me, I got so excited. I got up from my chair and I walked up to him and I shook his hands and I looked him in the eyes and I told him, I love you so much. You have changed my life. I love your teachings. And I remember when I told him this and gave him praise, there was no reaction. He just looked at me when I said it. He didn't nod, he didn't smile, he didn't do anything, just that he heard my praise to him. It was like my praise did not even affect him at all. So after we shook hands, us couple of people began to discuss what we wanted to ask Jesus. One person said, I want to ask him about something that one of the apostles taught and hear his commentary on it. Well, I told him I want to talk to Jesus about things he taught if he could explain it a little further. Well, I don't remember hearing anyone else's questions, but I had a chance to ask Jesus this question. I said, what did you mean that you have not come to abolish the law of the prophets? And Jesus said, I wasn't going to tell anyone to disobey Moses. That was his answer. It was real simple. I'm not going to tell people to disobey Moses. It wasn't some sort of elaborate answer, just something as simple as that. And I said, well, what about the Sabbath then? Because I know in the New Testament, this is me talking now, not the question, but I asked Jesus about the Sabbath because I know in the New Testament, there's no emphasis about keeping the Sabbath. And I wanted to know about the Sabbath. First thing Jesus said to me in that dream, he said, I am Lord of the Sabbath. Well, he just quoted the passage in the Bible. And I said, but what does it mean? Why was it given? And Jesus said, Moses expected the people to be holy on the Sabbath. And he said that he gave them one day not to sin on the Sabbath. And I never heard of that this was a day so that people would be able to not sin for one whole day. And he said this was the reason for it. I then started thinking about the passage where it says, keep the Sabbath holy. So I started to realize that's the essence of the Sabbath is to be holy. And then I said, well, but what about work? That's what I told him. What about work? Because I know the Sabbath is about rest. And Jesus said, if your neighbor needs help and it involves you working to help them, then you are living holy because you are serving your neighbor. So he told me it doesn't matter if you're working, if you're doing it to honor and serve your neighbor, then you're holy. Then he said, for example, if your neighbor is sick and you need to cook him something, then cook him something and bring it to him. Now, I remember when I was in Israel and I saw people, in Israel, everything shut down on the Sabbath. There's no restaurants open, no one cooking. Everyone cooked the day before, And yet Jesus said, if my neighbor is sick and he needs me to cook for him, then if I cook for him, I'm being holy. And he said, if your neighbor lives a far distance and you have to travel to go help him, then it's okay to go travel to help him. Now, I remember when I was in Israel, there was limitations on travel. You couldn't travel far distances on the Sabbath. But Jesus said, if it meant traveling long distances, then you go to help your brother, for that is holy. And then that was the dream. And when I woke up, I looked at my phone to add something into my phone and to add this dream, and it was 3:33 when I saw my phone. And I began to type in some things about that dream so I wouldn't forget it. And in this dream, I began to realize that's how Jesus lived about the Sabbath. You see, Jesus did not look at the Sabbath as a way not to work, but as a way to serve your neighbor. That's why he would heal on the Sabbath. And people the Pharisees would say, there are 6 days to work. Why don't you be healed on that day? But for Jesus, today was the day to be healed because he's acting in holiness. He's helping his neighbor out. And see, that was the intent that Moses had behind the Sabbath. But today, people, and even some Christians, they look at the Sabbath as trying not to do anything, Yet Jesus looked at the Sabbath as us acting in holiness, very different than the way people thought back in those days. That was my dream. I'd like to hear your opinion on what you think about the dream and the questions I asked of Jesus in that dream.